Hey everybody, BTO Pro here, and today we're going to solve a big problem in a small way using Vercel. Now, what I've got up here, as you can see, is the new hax.psu.edu. I'm going to log in, and one of the killer features as far as uptake and why we're seeing more and more people hop on board as those course numbers jump up is this button. It's import from. So a lot of times we've already made stuff. We need to be able to bring that with us. So when I go to import from, we see we have docx, Elms, Alen, HAXcms, Notion, Evolution, Gitbook, Pressbooks. What we're going to do is add support for static HTML. Now it has to be well structured, right? There's some caveats there. However, the code that makes docx work, where we can actually build a whole website from a doc file, what's happening there is we have a microservice. That microservice takes your uploaded doc file, it converts it to HTML with headings, and then uses that heading hierarchy to build a site outline. So what I was thinking the other day is, couldn't I just take HTML that is well structured as far as heading hierarchy and build an entire site off of that? I don't need to start at a doc file. So let's see how we go about doing that. So I'm going to fire up VS Code. I've actually got docx to site here running. So let's see how I would go about testing this. All right. The outer layer of Hax that you see when you log into Hax.psu, that's called app Hax. And so I can run app Hax locally on my computer to mess with it. It's got some, built-in sites it's reading off of. And I can do import from. All right, so we're at this screen. But I'm running local now, so I can start to add more buttons there. So I need to add a button on the front end. I need to add an endpoint on the back end, and then I need to add a little bit of glue code that wires those two things together. Now, I'm not going to go into all the detail of how docx to site works, but I'm going to use Pressbooks to site as an example. So Pressbooks to site, Elms LN to site, docx to site, Notion to site. These things have a ton in common, actually way more in common than they have apart. They're using a lot of the same information, actually. But if I look at Pressbook to site and docx to site specifically for a second, they're both taking, in this case, a file or a URL. And then we get here. We say, oh, well, let's build a whole site. We're going to walk through the HTML we find, turn all the H1s into new pages, and push them into a list. So then we're just going to walk through those H1s. Everything between the H1s is considered the content of that page. You can also see we've got support for H2s in this case, right? So it can sort of go like nested twice. And then H3 through 6 is assumed to be content of that page. So this isn't going to be exactly perfect in all scenarios, right? Without some other UI layer that kind of says, well, treat H1s as pages, H2 as pages, H3 as pages. But you should get the gist. So I'm going to just copy docx to site. I'm going to move it into this folder called convert because this is just the way we structure our services. And it's not docx to site. It's going to be HTML to site. So HTML to site. We're going to look at it. All right, we're under convert. I want to make sure the paths line up correctly for these request helpers, right? So we've got JSON response here. Okay, utility request helper. There we go. Okay, just making sure that that stuff actually lines up as far as the paths because I did move folders. Yeah, it does actually. Okay, good. All right. So we're going to look. All right, we don't need Mammoth. Mammoth is what does that conversion. We do not need either of those. Busboy, I don't believe. All right. If we look at HAXcms to site, we're actually able to take a URL, I believe. Yeah, base, result site data. All right, so we're able to take in a URL and we build a whole new site off of that. Kind of doing something similar here, actually. So we don't need any of this file. We're not uploading an HTML file, although that would be an interesting way to work. Right. We're not closing this out. That's what we're looking for. We're looking for convert to HTML. All right. So convert to HTML is taking data from this URL. Well, could just do, it's not site to HTML, sorry. It was Notion to, all right, and it probably is fetch. There we go. So I was looking for it just as an example. Okay, so we're going to do a fetch. If we do that in, I believe it's the Elms Alenta site, we've got fetch. There we go. Do some address replacement stuff here. Okay, in order to fetch the URL and make that the contents of what we're looking at. So we've also got resolve site data. Okay, so I'm going to make this show up here. So it's not on close of this. We do need a variable called HTML. It's a lot of deleting. We already have HTML there. So the site is going to be assumed. We need site to have come across. We get parse URL. That's coming from URL. There we go. In this other case, I call it repo URL. Right? And I'm basically just refactoring something that we've already written here. So Elms Alenta site just takes it does take repo URL. I guess that's the name that I stuck with. Notion also uses repo URL. All right, let's stick to those conventions. Repo URL, look through, replace site.json. That's not going to be in this one. No, that's not going to be in this one. So we'll just have URL is equal to body, handle trailing slashes. We don't actually care about that. You have to point at something that's HTML. We're going to make a wide sweeping assumption there, at least. The site name in this case is going to be, I guess, the URL. It's fine. I don't even use site name in this one, but in Elms Alenta, site name actually gets siphoned off. Okay, in Notion, site name. Nope, it's not in that one. Pressbooks, how do we generate a site name in Pressbooks? Maybe we can't auto-generate a site name from these. I haven't thought about that. Docx, we take site. Docx is site name. Right, file name. Use file name in that case. All right. So we're going to set site name to URL for the time being. Sure. Then we've got the base. All right. We're going to resolve site data from there. How we resolve site data is from this helper class. Oh, it's the same one we're already using. Okay. Validate some URLs, clean some information up. So we're going to resolve the site from parse URL. We're going to parse the URL that is sent across. It's literally going to be pasted into a field on the front end. Okay, and then this is docx import wrapper. We don't actually even, I don't know if we really target that. We'll just say import wrapper. I don't care that it says docx. It doesn't mean anything to me. Docx. All right, we don't need to import single page. Oh, that's the title in question. I see. All right, so we're gonna have to, we might have to go back and do something a little weird for that single page importing part. I'm actually, for the time being, I'm just gonna say new page. We will add support in the future for being able to import like a lesson at a time with this and it name the things appropriately. Although, wait, it has the elements, right? Yeah, it already has the elements. So we've got parent ID, item.title, right? Sub of a thing. Where's parent ID coming from in that case? It's going to be null. I see. Okay. So yeah, we don't actually have a page or a name for that one, I guess. Yeah. Okay. In the case of a branch, we go through, we loop through the elements. If we don't have any elements, I have to just make up. Okay. Yeah. Yep. Nope. That makes sense. I'm just making up a page if that's the case. Yep. Okay. So let me see what I'm doing here. I'm making a new page on the fly in this instance, and I'm just importing everything. But in this instance, a branch, this would be importing a lesson into an existing site. In that case, I'm going to walk through the heading ones. If I don't actually find any heading ones, which was a fallback I had to make, we just act like, hey, this is content of one page, and we just make up a name for it. Okay. Cool. So until next H1, H2, this is the biggie. This is doing a lot of our lift for us. Again, with that single name, in case we don't actually have a name, that's just going to be a new page. Okay. I don't have to do anything with any of that stuff, with the exception of the buffer.file name. In this case, file name, I guess, is just URL. Actually, it might be that. It might be parse URL dot path name, to be perfectly honest. That might be a little cleaner. Just kind of trying to I'm trying to reduce the amount of typing anyone ever has to do on planet Earth. So, all right, get rid of that. So we have an encapsulated function there. Okay, so we resolved site data from that address. I don't actually think that's the way that's going to work. I think what I'm going to do instead, yeah, I'm going to get rid of that. That is making a wide sweeping assumption. I'm actually going to hit the URL. It's nice to be able to have the parse URL data, obviously, for the thing that I did below. Yeah, because in this instance, I do want the full address if it has parameters in it. I'm just literally, we're going to request it. So in this case, we do HTML equals await fetch. And it's going to be URL. It's going to be treated as text. Gosh, I love Copilot. Thank you for writing that for me. I appreciate it. So resolve site data. I don't know if I do anything with the site after I resolve it. Yeah, I don't need to do that. Okay, good. So, and then I don't do anything like site dot. No, okay, so I wasn't even using that variable. Awesome. Okay. So we've got a site. We have assumed no parent on this. Type. Do we use type anywhere? Get fallback content for type. It's funny. I don't actually think I use that. Let's see. Do I use that in the other one? Like a type? Does that come? Oh, I do support type and parent coming. Oh, and method. How about that? Okay. Yeah, that's fine. So let's take those values. We do have to refactor them a little bit here. And we've got body, right? But body is coming from this, right? So okay, there's a standard post. That's what I wanted to see. Okay, gotta do a little bit of refactoring and setup here. So we've got body, and then we don't have downloads in this scenario because the way that we're operating right now. We parse the body. We're looking for a repo URL. If we don't have a repo URL, we bail because we're dead. Like, this is not valid. So now we say else, all right? So oops, we just bail on the response if you haven't given me the parameters that I need, right? You don't put a URL in there. And then we do have a repo URL, cool. Now let's see if we have these other ones, right? So we allow override of method, and that's actually gonna be body. It's gonna be if body dot method. And it's not an else if, just whatever factor comes in between busboy and this other code. All right, so body.method, and then we've got body.type. Okay, and then we've got body body.parent. Oh my gosh, I cannot type on this keyboard right now. Body.parent ID and field value. I don't care about that. Oh, it's saying it's not null. Yeah, okay, so let's make sure that you don't accidentally send the string null across. That's fine. Okay, so then parent ID equals that, type equals body.type, method is there, type, parent ID, body, repo URL, HTML, fetch the URL, right, which is repo URL. Okay, that's probably enough right there to do the vast majority of what this needs to do on the back end. It might actually be working already. We'll see. So, okay, refactor that on the back end. Now on the front end, right, we got to search for this line, this HAXcms docx. It's actually an HTML to site. And this is just a naming convention that I use. However, right, so in docx, that's fine. There's the steps, right? So we have an import from docx. Okay, we've got an evolution import. We've got a git book import is probably more the one I'm going to want. But we'll see. Might be. It's requesting availability. I don't need all that stuff. Okay. Import from URL. All right, what does import from URL? It works when we click on GitHub button, or Gitbook button rather. Let's add another one. Right, so we're actually adding code now for this. Type is not Gitbook, it's HTML. URL for the HTML content. And the callback is not going to be this at Gitbook, it's going to be HTML to site. Okay, that's going to run. And the parameter, in this case, is not marked down. The parameter is repo URL. Hello. Okay, now we're getting there. I leave comments and patterns to myself if you haven't noticed, because I don't know when I'm going to come back and do something again. So I try to leave little hints as conventions behind so that I can more rapidly expand the universe when needed. All right, so HAXcms, yep, it's a command in there, and this is under this folder. So this is the binding between this endpoint. When I reference it as this, I can just say, hey, call that, and it knows where to send the data. And this is going to be turn HTML into a site, convert HTML content file, I guess file location to site schema. And we're not going to have a body with this one. We are going to have repo URL. Right? Yeah. If it was a body, that implies that you're going to be able to upload a file contents. I could make it so you have an HTML file on your computer and you upload it, and we do it that way. That is an easy enough enhancement. Okay, so we've got that docx part, but this is import from URL. Okay, so we're going to go to that. Right, so we've got import from URL. We've got HAXcms, HTML2 site. Let's save all of these files just to be sure. And then we're going to go to import from site, and that is going to take in a URL or enable the HAXcms services, which will instantly give us access to that callback. The callback is coming from what got passed in from the target in this case. So the thing you click on gets that callback. All right, then we call the micro front end registry, which is going to give us the response data. Hopefully that response data just magically works. That would be awesome if it did. Now, how we test all of this, right? I already have it says create your own. Yeah. I gotta account for that. Okay. So we couldn't just, inject and add any button, right? We've got app hacks button, and it's got this prompt, and the prompt means when I click this, it'll say URL for the HTML content. And that's not going to do anything yet. But to get that nice label on there, I need to add support for type HTML. So that happens in apphacksbutton.js, which is referenced right there. Okay, so apphacksbutton is going to have a big old switch statement, just like I thought. And then under type, we are going to add support for, see there's Notion right there. So we're going to add support for HTML. Now, icons code, I guess, right? And this value is going to be HTML. And we're going to HTML. So then that switch statement runs. There we go. So we've got our little HTML code thing on the front end. Now, I don't have the back end running just because of this is how we do Vercel development. So I'm going to go to the top of my monorepo, which is where all this code lives, and I'm going to run Vercel dev. And what Vercel dev is going to do is it's going to fire up those endpoints and make them valid at a port, I should say, there we go, localhost :3000. Now, theoretically, I should be able to click to that, and I'll get, fragments of this site. That's not actually what's running there. But I fire up localhost port 3000, and I should be able to go to something like API/services media format, and there's like a pretty HTML. This service is not services, apps. Yeah. So it's API/apps/HAXcms/convert/HTML to site. So convert/HTML to site. And going there, if it doesn't give me a cache fragment, because I was working on this other site locally recently. Come on, give me the should fail, basically. It should say there's not enough criteria for this to go through. It's thinking about it. There we go. Okay, that's what I was waiting for. Standard post body is not defined. And so now, there we go. I made my Vercel endpoint bomb kind of on purpose, to be perfectly honest, to debug now. So that means I have standard post body. Okay, so I'm on back end. It's a little weird, right? But I'm on back end code, quote unquote. I need to make sure that we have standard response, but also these other things coming from the utilities. Standard response, because I also do invalid response, and so this should respond with an invalid request. It shouldn't bomb the server. BB is not defined. Okay, so where do I have BB? Okay, let's get rid of that. All right, go back, reload. And this is the feedback loop with Vercel of diagnosing a new endpoint. There we go. So now the endpoint responded appropriately, right? The reason is I'm missing the repo URL parameter. So theoretically, I should be able to put in the repo URL parameter, and then I should be able to point at something that is static HTML. Now it's actually going to run the logic of that code, and let's see if there's any hard-breaking issues here. It's also possible it requires a post, so because I am telling it to process post data. So let's see what goes on. It's thinking missing repo URL parameter. I was pretty sure that I allowed for post standard post body to support the request. Okay, so let's look at another service where I do that. Not all services do I say. Oh, there we go. I was going to say, not all services do I require they be a post. Must post a repo URL at minimum. There's not really. That would be nice if I could spell. So there's nothing saying I have. The difference here is that request.query is what's coming across the URL, like your get parameters, whereas standard post body is just some cleanup I do to process a post. You're not doing a post when you just put the URL in and hit go. So let's see if we have the body. If we do, then we'll have access to the variables down here. Otherwise, then we can actually have an issue. So in this case, I'm going to allow get or post in this case. You're not posting anything. It's not, privileged information. I mean, I could just throw this address at it. So let's see what happens now. I'm going to hit this endpoint. Let's see if we get any error. It reloaded. It's still claiming we're missing repo URL. Did I not type it correctly? It appears I typed it correctly. Repo URL. So here's a fun thing with debugging. I can also do console.log. Even though I'm on a backend server, you can type console.log. It's claiming that is null. Interesting. Let's make it run again just to be sure. It's a little strange. Let's do console.log request.query. Yep. Okay, reload. Let's see if we get some beautiful data. Hello. So that just parsed what it found on the other side, and it was able to say that it's going to generate. Oh, that's just 10 items under there. So it's going to generate a couple pages here. So what did I throw in? I threw in a link to stat. Okay, let's throw in this. My target data here. For context, that actually did work. It's taking the headings it found on this generic HTML export when you go to do print book in a Drupal site. Drupal probably version 5 through 10. had support for taking a book of content and just rendering all of it out into a single file from that root page. I should be able to hit that because it should be well constructed, semantic, highly accessible HTML, and then build a new website from it, is the idea. So that just worked. I'm going to hit this new address, and let's see, it's a bigger structure. Let's see if I get a bunch more pages. I should. All right, it's going to think. I can take out my console logs because we know that that's working now. All right, so we'll be able to debug that that works. And I'm going to stop pointing to this in just a second. Okay, it did return something. Nice. Did it error in any way? No. And it still claimed that it hit that. Yeah, pretty print. I'm not sure why it's not pretty. That was weird. Anyway, okay. So it found content. That's awesome. We go all the way down. Nice. That's the file name. Right, and it's some absurd file name. Like obviously that isn't the file name. It would be nice to clean it up a little bit, so it just said Medio3. But all right, so now I know the back end side of this works. So I should be able to inspect this page. All right, we'll throw that over on the side, and then I'll have the network inspector open. I'm going to click HTML. Actually, let's move to fetch. Okay, I'm going to click HTML. So our end users would get this prompt and says, hey, URL for the HTML content. And I would paste the URL. Oops, that is a, okay, just making sure it's the URL. But okay. 404, okay. All right, so let's see. Apps, I didn't put that address in correctly. Okay, right, so this is now we're debugging on the front end. We know the back end works when we hit those endpoints. And so the part that is off, and this is why I leave that little at HAXcms HTML to site, right? That's the name of the callback. It's by reference. So the rest of my code is right. The endpoint needs to shift. I edit one line, no matter how many times it's been implemented. So apps, HAXcms, convert HTML to site. Make sure all these pages are saved. Reload just to be sure. Okay, and then we're going to fire that up again. 400 error. That's a different. HAXcms convert bad request payload. The request payload, it is posted, right? Isn't that the address I had in before? That appears to be the address I had in before. So now I'm posting the data, right? It wasn't that it was in the query. So what I'm looking for in the query is it's going to be that it has repo URL in the query. If it doesn't have repo URL in the query, then I know it's invalid already. But I want it to analyze the post body. So let's do console.log on the body. The front end just spit back, hey, that wasn't constructed correctly. But I didn't actually update the front end. I updated the back end. Vercel is just going to let that code run when the next call comes in, hopefully. Oh, went through. And if it went through, that implies that I got a valid response. So here is the associated 129 pages that it is about to build in the exact structure of what it found and import all of the content. So now in this little space here, right, it says, let's take out that stuff. And I would theoretically hit create journey and I would get this new site. Now, from here, I have to actually build it. Because I'm running local assets. This is not actually running anywhere. So what the process is next is I'm going to close out of that. We're going to stop our server, status, I'm going to stop our other server. Okay. And now I'm going to go get status and see that we've got these buttons updated. We've got the microservice library here. I'm going to do git add a, git commit m, and we actually have an issue in our issue queue. Make an importer for a whole bunch of different sources, right? And so make an endpoint that assumes HTML, much like our ad. Yep. Point to an HTML file or URL. Nice. Okay. And right now I'm making a video, I believe, showing this working with Drupal 10 and Drupal 7. We already have it working with Elms, to be perfectly honest. So I don't really need to That's a different video. I'm going to assign this to me, and I'm going to add to the commit that we're pushing here. So now, while I've pushed to that location, I'm going to go over and I'm going to run a build. And the reason that I run a build is that we have the code. We know that the front end assets work. I can click on things, they go to the right place. They make the calls to the back end, air quotes, because Vercel is microservices. We'll say it's our back end. I worked on Vercel. I edited that endpoint so that it deploys at the right URL. I then made sure it worked locally, that when you click the asset, it sends the correct parameters to that URL, gets the right response back, and moves forward in the application's journey towards building a new website. The next step is to actually make that a real thing for end users. So one, I got to push that code up because Vercel is going to go and deploy it. So there we go. LRN web components. It's building the repository. Now, we don't use the live assets. And if we go to haxapi.vercel.app, which is where we're developing this, you can see all the different assets we have there. You can also search for microservices, and you can see some of the other microservices we have. I should actually add a page for, HTML to Hax schema or Hax site. However, this is just documenting for people browsing. Hopefully, you watching this video, hey, I want to adopt some of your elements or check them out. It's for that purpose. We don't actually use these assets. We let Vercel go and build. It builds its endpoints and it compiles this. Then I go and run a build, and I'm running that right now. It's running in the background. And that build is specifically for HAXcms. And so we have a different repository that is for HAXcms. So if you imagine, we have an idea, we have a new element to work on, we're working on those front end assets, they're over here. Then it gets time, hey, we should probably test this and see how it works in a real copy of HAXcms. We compile from those assets, and we end up with a static version of those assets. Now, we take those assets and we send them to content delivery networks. That's a different story. But we have a compiled version at a point in time, as of, like 2 minutes ago or whatever, that gets built on my machine. So I've tested the front end assets work. I've tested the back end endpoints work. Now, the next step in our quality control process side of this is I wait for Vercel to say, yep, we deployed that endpoint, which means the storybook updates. It means that those endpoints are valid. So we can point to live ones, not those local host ones. And this code is compiled on my computer here. There we go. It's about done. Starting HAXcms. We use a tool called ddev, and it's going to run a virtual local copy of the code base. So I'm going to open up this fake address, a local element, and I'm going to do import from, right? And it's not there yet, but it sort of is, right? I've got that create your own issue from before. Now, this happens a lot when I'm working locally, in part because I need to get brand spanking new versions of the assets, which is, if you ever see any of my videos, I always have dev tools up and I've got this checkbox. It's because I'm making so many changes at times that the cached version gets served to me because there's lots of files, right? It says 199 requests went out for this thing. The likelihood that Chrome is going to cache one of those 199 is pretty high because it's trying to serve me the site as fast as possible, even if it's local. So I now have HTML here. Now I'm going to actually fire that up, right? I'm in a local fake server, and this will fail. I'm just going to say this right now. And it's going to fail because that doesn't exist just yet. So once Vercel is done building, as it says it is building currently, right? I can go and I can check. If I hit this, it'll take me. Yeah. So I can check what it's doing in its build journey. Now, this is a little bit of like coupling services that is slightly annoying for the purposes of recording this video and you watching. However, it's building the code to build our storybook that has our styles, that is like tip of the iceberg stuff with the way that we end up working. That isn't actually what goes out to our end users just yet. It's more like propose what will be available. However, working in this way, if there was some issue with one of our Vercel endpoints, we can modify those endpoints and fix things in production for those little tiny services. So, for example, when you're in hacks.ph.edu, I go, I start a new journey, and I do import from. The functionality evolution is slightly different because it has to unpack a large zip file. But for these ones, it's spinning up a microservice in Vercel at one of those endpoints. So that infrastructure is off-sited from what we're doing. It's going to do a lot of processing. It might take a minute for some of these. Like some of our Elms courses are 300 plus pages where it has to actually request the content of every page in order to generate a new site schema. So instead of invoking that load on us, where we have extremely long running scripts for these one off sort of processes, that's a great example of when it's time to use something like Vercel. So Vercel spins up when data is requested to that endpoint, finishes, processes response, sends it back, goes away. That is the beauty of what we're getting with Vercel. So if there was some issue in that endpoint, this is going to go through and rebuild my endpoints. It's rebuilding the style guide currently. I probably could clean up the build, what the build process is doing. What command is it running? Yarn run. Yeah, it's running an analysis, right? So it's saying, hey, let's go find 1,300 or 1,931 files, and let's look for web components in those, just for any sense of how enormous our component library is. So it's going to run through and find those when it's actually done building, because our build routine is actually mostly focused around code quality. So once it's done building this code and analyzing it, it'll rebuild our storybook. We'll also then get that endpoint. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to hit pause, and once this is done building, then I'll pick up at that point so you can see what the next part is. So it didn't actually take that much longer. I think this was like 4 minutes. So it's like another 4 minutes. So it finished building. It did a little deployment summary here. It assigned a domain, which was the domain it was on. And then it emails me and says, hey, by the way, that's what the noise you just heard, if you heard it. So now that endpoint that was on my machine locally is out for the world at hacksapi.vercel.app. It's also not on our prem's infrastructure to do a very specific small task. So I'm not concerned about this getting slammed with traffic so that people can modify HTML content and spit back HAXcms capable material, right? Like that's such a nuanced, tiny task, but I shouldn't have to risk being taken offline because a ton of people access that or something. So let's go. All right, that was local. So deployed. Let's go to our dev site. Now, hopefully, when I go to hit this, right, we've got this open. That failed a second ago. Let's see what happens if I try it again now. Call that up, e-education. Got it. Bink. There we go. Okay, so we got the same net effect as before. However, we're no longer running with just static front-end assets that I'm editing. This is compiled. This is behaving as if it is a real copy of HAXcms. So I'm going to take video 3. I'm going to say create journey. Let's see what we get. So it's going to take that structure, those hundreds of, whatever it said it was, 126 pages or something. 129 pages, not bad. And it's going to import the content for every single one of those. And so now this is what it discovered as far as content. And you can see there's probably some cleanup I'm going to have to do with the importer with regard to this. But this should be at least the baseline HTML of all of this material. Now, it appears that it didn't find, parent pages correctly. It might need some menu hierarchy renesting, but it targeted lessons in this case, right? So my guess is, I haven't analyzed what the output is from this thing. My guess with that specific import is that lessons is an H1. Yeah. And that the things under it, no, that's still an H1. Okay. So that's an H1. And then section 3 of this page, isn't it? Yeah, so there's that thing. So what do meteorologists study? My guess is that then there aren't enough H2s in the structure of this. Right? This says section 1, section 2, section 3. I would have to know a little bit more about how this material is actually nested. Oh, I see. Okay, it's not actually flat. That's interesting. Okay, so it is nesting, right? There's an H1 there. At the same time, right, the book module exports this stuff. You see section 2, right? We've got lesson 8. Presumably, these are the pages under lesson 8. This isn't a flat structure. So what we've witnessed here is there are H1s nested under other H1s. This is not actually semantically accurate. Now, in context, when it's, people traditionally viewing the site, it is semantically accurate because it orders the content that way. I was under the impression that Drupal, when it would go to export these book items, would nest that material differently. So I'm going to have to write a slightly different way of going through and parsing that material. However, it did still pull all of it in with this heavily nested structure. Now, just for comparative purposes, let's see what happens when I go to import. This is a Drupal 10 structure. This has so there's an H1 for lesson 0, and then there's an H1 for what it's, yeah. So it also is doing this sort of like title of the page is the high level heading. Now, it might get the content below it somewhat accurately in this case because they're using heading hierarchy. So let's see, just see what happens, right? I'm repurposing importers, and we're still currently sitting below an hour to have made this work. So, all right, I've got my Medio lesson site pulled in there. Let's see if there were any errors with its creation. No. The dev tools do get very angry sometimes when I'm viewing the site and recording at the same time. Yeah, holy mackerel! I got very angry about the time to actually paint that site. Oh, there we go. Okay, so I was looking for. I had just fixed something so that I would be logged in. I mean, even with where it is currently, the fact that I could pull this open and then just start modifying this website that was from an OER resource is pretty awesome. But let's go back and see if I can't import a little more accurately that stat one. Oh, it should go. So it should be dang near instantaneous, right? So this is just one lesson, 3 pages or something, with how it has structured it, right? So because they're using YouTube, you can actually see some of the heading hierarchy, the thing, or heading styles, right? So this got imported as like 4 pages, and so even with this one, because these pages are just, I don't know, a little cleaner semantically as far as how they were initially made, I can go in the outline designer and we could bump these pages underneath things. Right, down. Right, so they're nested under lesson 0. All right, so now we have lesson 0 there, and then theoretically I could import the other ones. Obviously, the more ideal scenario would be that the source material this is coming from, this like lesson 0, right, should have, it has 3 pages. All right, so it did actually discover this one correctly. I'm not sure if it's because it's so much more heavily nested with the other one. It's also possible that the markup is different between a Drupal 7 site and a Drupal 10 site. This is not something I've deeply explored at this time. But so if that information was flat, or if I go through and I parse it slightly differently, then I'll be able to pull those sites in. So the site was made in Boot, and this is mostly now just like, let's see what happens. So that site was made in Bootstrap. This is a Bootstrap-esque theme that one of my students made quite a while ago. So it's not good. It actually keeps some of the box styling. That's kind of cool. So it doesn't look half bad. Now there's not media pulled in because I'm not stitching those references back together in this instance, right? It's not to say this was flawless. I'm also doing this rather rapidly, right? We can see where this file lives. So I could auto append the URLs from before. So you at least see the media, although now it's coming from where it used to be, right? So you get into some questions of OER permanence in that way. Should we be downloading the stuff that goes along with it? But as far as a demonstration of how we go about getting new things into our platform and what our workflow, and this is leading up to X. We have other platforms where we test this stuff with live content. This is just for local, to get up to this point to basically be able to shoot a video and have a conversation with someone about the viability of something. So very excited for hashing that issue out further. Solving that probably would solve some issues we have with the Pressbooks import. The Pressbooks importer is marked beta because it actually does a very similar thing, because they don't nest the content in this nice flat way some of the other systems that we were importing do, like Gitbook, for example. But if you want to learn more about the project, play around with this functionality, you'd have to pull the code, but eventually it'll be up on hax.phd.edu. Hax.phd.edu will be our new home for all things Hax. We're working really hard on documentation and tutorial sprint so that we can really bolster what that site is and hopefully help people generate more high quality resources online that work anywhere at speed. So thanks for checking us out.